Welcome to the Bridge to the Cloud, a podcast hosted by TelcoBridges. I'm Alan Percy, a podcast host. And today we're going to talk about a really interesting topic and have a very interesting special guest in Eric Burger. He is the CTO for the Federal Communications Commission and one of the experts on robocalling and what the Federal Communications is doing about it. And Eric, thanks for spending a few minutes with us today.
Thank you, Alan, for having me.
Yeah, well, we're here at the Illinois Institute of Technology Real-Time Communications Conference, and we just finished up a session that Eric delivered a few minutes ago about what the FCC is doing about the robocaller problem, and he covered a lot of different topics, and I thought a real summary would be a great podcast for today. So Eric, let's just start with the problem statement, right? I think it's oft discussed about it being one of the biggest problems that the Federal Communications and the FTC deals with, so maybe a quick summary on that.
Yeah, unquestionably, this is the number one consumer protection issue that we have at the FCC, and it's personal. I get calls. In fact, I was thinking of setting it up so my phone would ring, didn't have to. My phone rang. There was a robocall during my presentation on robocalls.
Yeah, that was very well timed.
That's right, that's right. It's happened to the chairman, happened to another one of the commissioners in the middle of a commission meeting. And these are things that we are kind of laughing about, but you also probably know someone or have a family member or know a family member who knows someone who's lost money in a scam,
right?
Or have worried about a loved one when they get one of the send money to Mexico kinds of scams. So this is a real problem with real impacts.
Right. No, I know in my own family, I worry deeply about my parents, and I know some of these attacks are very slick, and it's very hard for them to know real from fake. So one of the things, the impact is more recently has been not just that robocalls are bad, but it's that the fraudulent robocallers are a problem. And kind of maybe clarify that a little bit, the difference between reasonable and illegal.
That's right, and that is an important distinction. That there are a few laws that ban certain types of calls that we colloquially today call robocalls. And they typically have the characteristics of someone's trying to sell you something or get something of value from you. You did not give them permission to call you. They maybe are randomly dialing or sequentially dialing. Basically, they're not dialing because you've given them permission in your phone number. They're just guessing your phone number. And another characteristic is often that they'll be using pre-recorded voice, or in our world, it's some kind of interactive voice response system. Press 1 for this wonderful vacation.
Right.
Those are all illegal. Congress passed laws that make those calls illegal. If you're on the do not call list, makes it illegal. And the other characteristics are there. However, that's not to be confused with legal uses that happen to be made by automated dialing platforms. We talk about school closings. Humorous, or maybe not so humorously, the FCC was closed on Monday because we had a flood. And how did we know? Because Sunday night we all got text messages and automated calls saying, hey, the FCC is closed, don't come tomorrow. Definitely do not want to block those calls.
Right.
So yeah, our focus is on the illegal calls, the scams, the calls when you don't want to be called.
Right. And part of that is this neighborhood spoofing. Maybe you could explain real quick where that kicks in.
Certainly. And part of it is, from a rulemaking we did around allowing carriers for the first time to be able to block calls that were dialed that you had caller ID, return numbers of area codes that didn't exist, or exchanges that weren't allocated, or there were maybe the inbound call numbers for, say, the IRS, where the IRS would never be placing a call from those numbers, but they would show up as it's the IRS. And one of the results of that is that as carriers start implementing that blocking, the spammers, since they're already making up caller IDs, would start using numbers of real numbers. And what's the best way of doing it? Picking numbers that are in your neighborhood. And by neighborhood, the area code, the first 3 digits, and the exchange, the next 3 digits, are the same as what's on your phone. More impactful for wireline, because it is literally your neighborhood. Seems to be anecdotally a bit less in wireless because given number portability, wireless number portability, it's been 7 years since we've had that. A lot of people have moved and they look at it and they say, this is obviously a robocall because nobody from where I lived 6 years ago is still trying to call me.
Right. Well, I know I and probably you and virtually everyone, all the listeners have been subject to these. So clearly a big problem. Now, more recently also too, there was finally some actions that the FCC was able to take to get some of the illicit robocallers convicted or fined. So maybe a quick overview on that.
Yeah, and a couple of things. Convicted sounds like court case, and the FCC is, we do have an administrative law judge, but we are enabled by Congress to impose civil forfeiture. So basically we can fine people. And this commission has issued the largest fine, actually, for anything, not just robocalling, but the largest fine ever, $120 million to an individual who placed 96 million calls in the period of a few months. We've done over $200 million of forfeiture this year, which again is unprecedented. If you look in the record, maybe 18,000 here, 67,000 there. We're really getting serious about having consequences for people who perpetrate these illegal robocalls.
So what are the chances that you're going to be able to cash that check?
That's really way outside of my area of expertise. I would hope that at the very least it's sending a message, and I do believe the federal courts get involved if they don't pay. So I don't think that it's like getting a speeding ticket in another country that if you're never going to show up, you don't care. I think this is something that would probably follow people around.
Yep. Okay. So that certainly, chasing, there's a disincentive, right, by chasing them with these kinds of fines, et cetera. So, but I think as an industry, we've been talking about some technologies to put an end to some of this too. And one of the things we've been talking about in our webinar series is about stir shaken and the implementation. And we've been talking about the mechanisms, the underlying mechanisms of how it works. Probably for the listeners, it'd be good to just a quick overview of how stir shaken is envisioned to make a difference from your perspective. And then we'll move on to where is it in its implementation.
Yeah, there are basically two uses of stir and shake in the campaign against robocalls. The first one is the one that most people are aware of, which is if we have signaling that's attested, if we have some confidence level in that from number, that would help in our analytics. Either to say, yep, it's a call from a large enterprise that I do business with, and the attestation comes from a large carrier that they care about their reputation, and so they're only going to sign it if it's really that caller. I've got more confidence to answer the call. And likewise, if those indicators are not there, I might have more confidence to say, tell my carrier, I don't want those calls, to use one of the many third-party applications out there that deal with not only illegal calls, which is in the domain of the FCC, but unwanted calls, which is kind of the domain of these third-party applications. So it raises, and especially with neighborhood dialing, it raises the likelihood of either letting the call through because it really is your neighbor, or blocking or giving further treatment to the call that's highly likely not to be your neighbor. So that's one use. And that's kind of the use case that people have been thinking about from the beginning with STIR in particular. But as we were talking about these large forfeitures, one of the things that we'd like to use this technology for is we actually will know where these calls enter the network, and we'll be able to trace these calls using basically non-reputable technologies.
Right.
You know, there's a limited number of certificate authorities which will be giving signing certificates to carriers. We'll be able to find that carrier. And then we can, depending on what happens, figure out, the appropriate action. If there's a particular carrier that seems to be the carrier of choice for illegal robocalling, that could lead us in a direction. Or a particular enterprise. So the carrier is doing all the stuff they're supposed to do, but that enterprise is the source of illegal robocalls. Again, we can take appropriate action.
So it's, in a nutshell, it's like a fingerprint on every call that then gives you a traceability back to the origin of the call, which then gives you some remedy because you can go back and squelch that particular abuser.
That's right. I would offer that fining the abusers, and again, not the FCC's role, but the FBI and state attorney general, district attorneys, put them in jail.
Yes.
Because they are committing fraud. That is a bigger deterrent than just saying, well, we'll block the calls you don't want.
Sure. Yeah. And I would imagine somewhere in there, somebody's going to lie to the FBI, and that'll just pile on top of it all. Right.
That's right.
Okay. Interesting. So let's talk about the implementation of it. Obviously, we're talking to carriers about infrastructure to help them implement STIR/SHAKEN. Where do you think it is along in its implementation, and maybe some, a peek at where it's going to go?
Yes, so there are three parts of it. One is, does the equipment exist to implement STIR and SHAKEN? And that's where companies like TelcoBridges and others come to play. And most actually already have it. And in fact, we were very heartened when we were talking to some vendors who basically said, yeah, well, our carriers told us if you don't have it for us in our labs this year, you will no longer be a vendor.
Right.
Which made us at the FCC pretty confident that no, carriers are serious. And that's the second tranche, which is, how quickly can the carriers buy this equipment and get it deployed. And note that most of the vendors we've talked to have said it's not that expensive. In fact, many are doing it as part of their regular maintenance. Others are charging, but modest amounts, because actually it's not that dramatic a technology to implement. The third piece, which is the piece that's right now underway, is, okay, so if we got equipment manufacturers that implement it, carriers who want to buy it, part of this is how do we create that fingerprint?
Right.
The technology has been around. It's the same technology, similar technology to what we've been using on the web. But in order to track down the carriers, we need basically to have someone say, well, you're a carrier, you can get one of these. You're Joe's robocalling and scam service, you don't get one of these. So that is the policy authority, or PA, and of course this being industry-led, we need someone to figure out who the PA is going to be. That's the governance authority, or GA. That has been stood up. It's industry and academia, and I think consumer groups are involved. They pick the policy administrator who comes up with all the policies of who's a carrier, and they pick a certificate authority.
Right.
So we are kind of on that arc. Industry does not need to wait, and my understanding is industry is not waiting. A few carriers are basically saying, well, here's my certificate, give me your certificate. If I get a call from you, I can check it. That works if you have 2 or 3 or 4 carriers, but remember, we do have 3,000 carriers in the United States. So while that bilateral checking is starting to happen, and I would hope to see it, in fact, possibly as early as the beginning of next year, if not sooner, for the sort of the nationwide rollouts waiting for the GA, PA, CA infrastructure, which I would expect to be early to mid next year, which means ubiquitous rollout towards the end of 2019.
Okay. So things are progressing. Sounds like we got a few more hurdles when it comes to certificate authorities and the governance. There's hope.
That's right.
There's
That's right.
hope.
Well, the thing is it's moving.
Yeah.
It's gone from, we've been talking about this for over 5 years now here at the
Yeah.
IIT conference, certainly. And there was a lot of momentum with the robocall strike force, which ended a year or two ago. And a lot of people have been saying, hey, it's been kind of quiet. Do we care? And the answer is it's been going on behind the scenes.
Right.
The North American Numbering Council, which is a FCC advisory group, basically came up with this plan. And the commission said, great plan, go do it. And they are actually going and doing it.
Yep. Well, I'm excited. It looks like we're making even more progress. In December, there's the SIPNOC event in Herndon, Virginia, and it sounds like there's a dedicated track that's part of that. I know you participated in that also, that event, and hopefully there'll be some more updates from that. And with that, Eric, I'm going to thank you so much for being generous with your time. I appreciate it, and of course, coming here to Chicago. I know the attendees are very much appreciative of all you do behind the scenes and bringing this and many other issues to a close. So appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for the time and the opportunity. And I would offer to anyone, if you have thoughts on robocalling, do let us know on our comment system. Again, we're looking more for how it affects you, because we have lots and lots and lots of comments, even from me.
Yeah.
I hate getting robocalls. We know that. We're now trying to get this done and implemented, and to make the world a much calmer place.
Yes, a much calmer place with less ringing. So thanks again. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Alan. That's great. Yeah. Bye.